I came to Taiwan in 1996 on a 2-week holiday to visit my girlfriend at the time. That led to me meeting a person while I was out cycling in the mountains, who then invited me to race the Tour de Taiwan. Racing the Tour de Taiwan led me to being contacted by what was one of 2 carbon fiber factories here in Taiwan, which were the very first 2. They knew how to make carbon fiber product, but they had no idea if it was a good bicycle or not. So they needed somebody who rode bicycles that could tell them if it was a good product or not. I was riding a steel bike at the time, so it was really my first time into carbon fiber. So I really didn't know how to judge it, but it just didn't really feel like a very good bike at that time. I think a lot of that was geometry related more than the actual manufacturing method. The bikes were not light and they were very expensive. You know, I think we really kind of gave them a much better understanding of the way that a bike was used, because I don't think they really understood, you know, all of the stresses that a bike sees, the way that it's used, you know, what are the goals for it. I don't think they fully understood that. They were a bunch of Taiwanese engineers that had been making tennis rackets out of carbon fiber. But, you know, how does a bicycle is very different, obviously, than a tennis racket. And so, you know, it was definitely really trying to explain that to them. The geometry is one of the absolute most important things of a bike. But geometry isn't just the way the bike fits. Geometry is also very related to the way the bike handles. And so I think a lot of people get this wrong because there's a lot of compromises in geometry. If you look at a factor, you know, we have 4 different forks on our bikes of different angles. Most companies have 1, at best 2. And the fact that we have 4 really says, you know, we're really focused on making sure the whole size range works, not compromising. So that's really important. And then kind of understanding the balance of stiffness to geometry. A lot of people get, you know, they get stiffness, or maybe they get the fit of geometry, but they don't get how it all kind of comes together. And that's why I think when somebody gets on a factor, just within like 100 meters, if they can tell, they're not necessarily this is something good, but they can tell this is something different. And then after you go ride it for a day, you're like, yep, this is good. Yeah. Before I got to create factors, I worked with many great brands. I worked with Cervelo, I worked with Trek, I worked with Canyon. So I've worked with a lot of really good engineers. The biggest difference between when I was working for them versus working for Factor was they a lot of times had constraints that I don't have, whether it be cost constraints or, you know, manufacturing constraints. You know, I would go to some of my customers and say, you know, if we spent $40 more, you know, we could improve this by 20%. And their answer was almost always impossible. They're like, we want to spend $40 less, not $40 more. And so they didn't, I mean, they would love to have those gains, but they were unwilling to pay for those gains. Because $40 at manufacturing cost might be several $100s at the retail cost. And that's what made it impossible. For me, I don't ever consider what something costs to make versus what I sell it for. I always think about, this is what I want to sell it for. Am I happy with the dollar amount that we made? Not the margin or the percentage, but just the dollar amount. And if the answer is yes, then that's what I do. And so it's a totally different way than every other bicycle company has to work. We totally decided, you know, at the beginning of Factor that we were not going to be caged by the same rules of so many other bicycle companies that are controlled by accountants or product managers. We were going to make the bikes that we as cyclists want to ride. And I purchased Factor from John Bailey at BF1 Systems. I think even before I had ever thought about having my own brand, I had already seen the Factor 001 in a French magazine, I think it was. And I saw it and I was like, wow, that is really cool. And this is like 2012 or 13. I don't even know what year it was, but I was like, that's pretty cool that somebody's gone through that level of work. They had made everything on that bike, the wheels, the frame, the handlebars. And I was like, wow, that's really quite something. And then to end up working alongside them a few years later, you know, really showed me, you know, their engineering prowess. And so, you know, it really sort of matched our company quite well. The fact that John Bailey, who founded it, ends up coming back to work with me a few years later, it's great, great addition. The benefits of being a manufacturer, having our own factory, is we don't have a lot of constraint or cue for product development. We have an excellent design team. The instructions I gave them is I said, a lot of people don't want to ride disc brakes because of the weight penalty. But we all know, at the UCI, World Tour level, it's 6.8 kilos for the complete bike. And I said, so I want a disc brake bike at 6.8 kilos. That was the mandate that I gave them. I didn't tell them what it had to cost, what it had to look like, or any of that. I said, this is what I want, and then they came back to me a few months later and they're like, here it is. And I was like, fantastic. And so I don't really want to give them so much direction because I really want to see what they come back with. Where's their creativity? We just give them the goals and then they have to meet the goals. Then of course it comes back to the manufacturing once the engineers and designers have, sort of passed it off. And again, I don't put the constraints on them. I say, use the best materials to achieve this goal. Don't worry about the cost. That's, we'll figure that out later. Everybody rides bicycles here at Factor. I like to say, I'm a professional cyclist and I'm one of the slowest guys in our company. An important person in our history, which is David Miller. David Miller uses the word genuine. I would say that's really the point that we're trying to get across is that, Factor is a genuine company. We're not a marketing company. We're an engineering company that makes great bikes. The marketing, is something that we all have to deal with, but it's not something we necessarily get a lot of pleasure from. Our pleasure comes from making the best bikes. We take what we do very seriously, and we're trying to provide an experience to people that when they buy a Factor, they know every Factor is going to have that same level of experience coming with it. People like Baden, people like David, they're always more about they verify the job that we've done more so than the input along the way. I did a lot to make sure that professional cyclist was on our bike. But for that consumer who I run into when I'm out riding, who doesn't know who I am, to me, that's actually more exciting because I was like, this person made this decision to buy that bike. The cycling teams, whether it be, previously AG2R, now Israel Startup Nation, the feedback is always like, wow, this bike is fantastic. And these people, I'm asking them first, what can I do to make it better? And they're like, no, it's fantastic. So that gives me a lot of satisfaction that we did our homework and we provided the bike that, it's a tool for them to do their job with, and they don't feel like they need a better tool. A lot of people, they look at the World Tour sponsorship and they think that's the end all of what we're doing. But in fact, in many ways, I feel closer to like our ladies team, Park Hotel Valkenburg, one of the smaller, World Tour level teams, but with incredible results and incredible people, and really getting, they're doing a lot to get other women, into cycling. And so I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's one of the faults of professional men's cycling at the moment is it's not very inclusive at all. And so I think it's something that really needs to be worked on. I look at Israel Startup Nation as one of those teams that is trying to become much more inclusive. It's one of the things that, attracts me to it. I look at gravel racing as being so much more inviting, so much more inclusive. We released a gravel race bike. The name LS actually comes from the man who gave me my first opportunity to race bikes. His name was Larry Shabazz. And a lot of people were kind of guessing, what is that name about? And I'm like, it's not something so sophisticated. It's, it's just paying tribute to someone who is important to me. I think equality isn't, I don't think it's just in cycling. I think it's in the, all aspects of life. I live here in Taiwan where I am a foreigner, no question about that. It's pretty easy to spot. But yet I'm treated with a lot of respect. I had a second racing career kind of late in my life where I raced UCI Asia Tour. And in all of those places, I was treated with so much respect because I'm white, but just because I was a guest. And because I acted as an appropriate guest. There's nations that have people that travel a lot, and they definitely seem to be more open-minded and understanding than those more closed-off nations that don't travel a lot. I don't think it's even just the travel. I think cycling opens your mind up to even your own neighborhood, right? Because when you go ride your bike, you don't have to always ride the same way. And so that's why even in my own neighborhood, I love riding my bike, because you get to see so much more. And so, yeah, if you extrapolate that across riding around the world and taking your bike with you, it's so much more of an experience that way. I think there's still segments in the market that we need to fill. Right now, we're a premium racing bike company. I think we just need to be a premium bike company. E-bikes and mountain bikes and, commuter bikes that address a segment of the market that we currently don't, but there's obviously a demand there. Factor, if it's a great, successful bicycle company, allows us to do more philanthropic work, which is really the more important thing for us. Is we want to get more people riding bicycles. They don't necessarily need to be factors. In many cases, they can't be. We might even have another brand for just, exactly those kind of bikes, but they won't necessarily be factors. That's my long-term goal around Factor. It's not about, winning Tours de France. It's about, really building the sport that I love so much and that's given so much to me.